Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Management, a VUCA perspective. We are discussing core concepts. And on this amazing and very fulfilling journey, I am your friend and guide, Siddhi Prad Bhattacharya. We have been delving deeper and deeper into concepts of segmentation, targeting, and positioning, and we'll carry that journey forward in today's conversation as well. Now, when we are inspecting the consumer decision-making process, we've already heard from the topmost minds in marketing, namely Kotler, who says products are created in the factory, but brands are created in the mind. Positioning, where we've reached at in our journey, is where the mind comes to play front and center. Typically, that is the impression we are leaving behind in people's minds. We are giving them something to act upon, and precisely where comes in purposing. Purposing is about giving a beacon to consumers and the brand also, so that they can act around that single focal point, a continuous tether to our belief systems, and it comes from individual purposing. So each person believes that they are purposeful towards a certain goal or objective in life, and this ranges wider once you start getting more and more people on board, and it forms tribes and communities that surrounds these brands, which are able to get that kind of purposing out there and a belief system which fuels that particular purpose. So with that in mind, we come to this conversation about referencing, parity and differentiation, where the role of influence on consumers' decision making becomes that much more important. Consumer purchase decision journeys have evolved from very straightforward linear processes, and they have now become complex multi-point touchpoint ecosystems. Traditional advertising and celebrity endorsements have given way, and now you've got multiple drivers of purchase decisions, and like we've spoken of before, omni-channel strategies ensure that seamless transitions happen between online and offline experiences. At the end of the day, what people take home are these very experiences. And so therefore, brands which want to create an indelible mark on the consumers' minds, they have to foster and stoke the experiential learning curve of the consumer. How they integrate with the brand, how deep are they invested into the brand's ethos, and therefore the purposing. So all of these things form part of our journey today, and this is where, despite a rapidly shifting landscape, the brands typically marry that dynamic shift and keep the consumer in their fold as they go forward in this entire journey. So today we have got frames of reference, points of parity, and finally we are looking at the points of difference also within this fold. Here, frames of reference, let's start with that. So as an introduction to frames of reference, we can look at the point of how consumers assess an offering relative to a reference point. How do you plan a story? How do you plan a journey? You have to have a starting point. You probably would have heard stories begin with once upon a time. So that time when this story must have happened is not very clear. But the way the story starts tells you that it has started at some point in time which is undefined but far away in the past. This and various other ways of storytelling actually bring about the points of reference. If you're planning to travel between 2 points on a map, you will need points of reference to triangulate where your starting location is and where your ending location is. And on the way from point A to point B, wherever the roads turn and twist, you will need markers along the way, along the journey, to plot your progress as you move forward. So hence, all of these things form reference points. Similarly, in life, when you have certain experiences, those experiences leave a certain analytical learning as well as an emotional touch point. Both of these things create a perception and prepare you for such similar occurrences in the future. And that perception, in this case of marketing, the value perception, varies based on the comparisons that one must do with what their previous experiences are and with what the current opportunity actually presents itself with. So, marketers can use this and can use the influence from this to create the necessary frames of reference so that people understand what they're all about. They need to understand why it makes for a certain value to delve into a particular brand's partnership for the end consumer. Now, why do we want to define a frame of reference? Because it establishes a certain benchmark for evaluating a brand's benefits. You need to have a certain measure, the metrics which you will use to ensure that you understand how much value you are going to derive out of a transaction with a brand is precisely where a frame of reference comes into play. It is also linked to a kind of target market selection. Which particular target market works best in your scenario as a brand is something which you will have to bring into consideration, and it also defines who else is at play. So, hence it defines the competition and the consumer expectations. If done right, it also puts in the market forces at play and defines exactly how the market also responds to the stimuli which the consumer as well as the brand are subjected to. In terms of frames of references, there are various, but the first that any brand must take into consideration is the competitive frame of reference. Why so? Because you're not the only shark in the sea. That automatically means that you need to understand how do you stand better and how do you stand differentiated when it comes to the other players who are vying for the same consumer's piece of attention. Here you will see that you need to be part of the larger category. So, category membership is like a club class entry pass, and it identifies whatever the primary competitors are there and what they are doing and how you can also participate in the same level playing field. There are examples of this. For example, PepsiCo versus Coca-Cola and therefore their subsidiaries Aquafina versus Dasani, Wells Fargo versus Bank of America if you were to consider banking as a sector, and PetSmart versus Petco if you're talking about pet products. You've got Pedigree, you've got Drools nowadays. A lot of products in the similar fashion have entered the category. Now, when you look at category players, the category players must suffice those specific requirements to be able to participate as serious competition in that category. Now, competition obviously extends beyond the obvious players. So, yes, if you're looking at soft drinks, you will look first and foremost at the carbonated market. You will look at international well-entrenched players, you will look at local Indian players who are coming into play and who are throwing up the challenge. You will also look at juices, you will also look at brands like Paperboat and Raw Pressery who provide alternatives. And now people may be swayed to not have the carbonated drink and quench their thirst. So at the end of the day, quenching thirst becomes the primary reason for the category to exist. So how do you take the competitive frame and expand its area of influence? Here you can enter new markets which require you to have broader or aspirational competitive frames. For example, we were speaking of juices. Now, carbonated drinks, so far so they seem like slightly unhealthier versions of what you should be drinking to quench your thirst. Instead, if healthier options were available in the form of juices, then again there is a criteria of whether these juices have sugar added to them prior. In order to stop the unhealthy aspect creeping in, you might want to go for freshly pressed or cold pressed juices. So, when we are talking about aspirational competitive frames, what do we exactly mean by that? Aspiration means to move from your current state to a more evolved and higher state. Disruption, if it moves people from their current frame of reference and moves them to a higher, more emancipated state, that helps them create that necessary wedge between themselves and the competitors as far as the consumer is concerned. Now, disruptive competitors or even the technology that they bring into play, all of these things can reshape the way competition actually plays out in that particular category. Now, for example, energy bar market segmentation, you've got Power Bar, Luna, Balance Bar, Priya. All of these bars have their own unique way of promising a certain benefit, whether it be the kind of protein that comes in that particular bar, the kind of high energy, instant gratification that you can get, and a variety of other offerings. They also try and keep the health angle alive. Health is extremely important in the energy bar segment because people who have the consumption of energy bars on their list, they are people who are looking for quick energy on the go. Precisely why they will want to have something which does not give them the unnecessary guilt of adding more calories to their diet. So, bars must keep certain things which are part of the category hygiene whilst also planning for things that are their own unique differentiators. Now, when you plan for competitive positioning, you are trying to use strategy to keep yourself differentiated and elevated at the same point in time. How do you create this kind of advantageous frames for yourself as a brand? So, let's say in the case of the Automobile Association, you positioned yourself as a fourth emergency service. Now, that does not really help them create that much of a dent. So, hence, if you're thinking of something like match poker, they rebranded themselves as a mind sport. So, that is how you actually got into play, that your mind was the one which is being brought into play here. And so, therefore, this is the kind of poker that actually gets your mind working and your skills involved. In the case of the US Armed Forces, you shifted your positioning from just being somebody who does patriotic duty to training for leadership for the future. So, positioning keeps shifting, and the way you're able to tap into that particular positioning is something that gives you an added advantage when you're talking to your end consumers. Dynamic markets where things are shifting on an everyday or an every month basis, you may require multiple frames and multiple points of convincing, where you are trying to give various different kinds of logic, all adding up to the same positioning thought. So, leadership is something, for example, when you look at the US Armed Forces, leadership is the central positioning statement, but patriotic duty also builds into that, while training for leadership so that you are better able in the future is also something that builds into the same pipeline. So, you have to keep your positioning similar, but you can create different kinds of storylines leading up to that single end point. Now, the other way to treat positioning is by using frames that give you points of difference. Why points of difference? So that you are able to stand apart from whatever competition you are facing. So, here the task is to figure out what unique attributes you can bring about, which you can own completely, and this helps that you are distinguished as a brand. So, this gives you a certain benefit, an edge if you will, over what your competition is saying. So, the idea to identify something like this is that first it must be strongly associated with your brand, and the evaluation has to be positive, at least from the consumer side, because if it is negative, even if it is strongly associated, it could actually kill your brand on the contrary. So, therefore, you have to figure this part out, and you have to ensure that your competitors do not have this in the same extent that you are able to capture. For example, when you're talking about Louis Vuitton, they're calling out stylish handbags. Now, this as a positioning has over time, it has been worn away by other newer entrants. For example, you've got Coach, you've got Burberry, and various others which are eating into that Louis Vuitton positioning. But still, Louis Vuitton, being the first mover, will have that certain advantage and will be able to defend it for some time. Energizer as a longest lasting battery is something that they have been always positioning for, fought very, very intensely by competition, Duracell. So, between the two, Energizer and Duracell, they pretty much have the top of mind recall when it comes to batteries, whether of the AA, AAA or various other formats. When it comes to financial advice, Fidelity gains that particular position and says we provide the best financial advice. Yes, there are others who try and gnaw away at that position because it's the most obvious and most defensible position. But therefore, once you've gained a certain positioning, you have to keep at it. You have to ensure that people remember you, and which is where typically all sorts of marketing and communication activities lead you towards. Now, which is also a space where your brand authority and its authenticity becomes of key importance. You have to have that defined, and so that you can actually defend it with whatever communication you are dishing out at the end consumer. So, the role of brand authenticity is that it helps you build consumer trust and loyalty in the longer run. For example, Hershey's, Kraft, Crayola, all of these have created that sort of authenticity through tradition. If you look at their products, if you look at their packaging, if you look at their communication, if you look at their entire marketing exercises, you will find that they continuously speak about the tradition, the number of years that they've been in business for, the tradition that they have when it comes to making those particular products that they sell. All of these things help these particular brands hold that particular space in the consumer's mind. It is defensible because there is a heritage behind whatever they have done so far. For example, Welks reinforces authenticity with local sourcing, and so therefore they are able to say that we work with small businesses, we work with small business providers and sourcing, so that we are able to keep our market going forward. So, you have to have that kind of authenticity. It is what you will be known for. So, this is a brand choice. The brand must choose what positioning it wants to hold and then defend it. Defend it with whatever attributes they can speak of and say how they are doing it better than competition, even if competition should start to try and gnaw away at it. Then there are other ways to defend it. You create multiple points of differentiation. So, how does multi-point differentiation work? Strong brands typically excel in multiple areas. They don't leave anything to chance. They typically do a lot of things which add to the overall experience. See, at the end of the day, whatever the human mind interacts with, whatever the human mind experiences, it stores that particular experience. How does it store? If I were to take this entire presentation and speak of it to you, you would remember a decent amount of its parts by the end of half an hour. By the end of 4 hours, you would remember top notes. A day after, you would remember probably the broad subject and what you learnt out of it. A month later, you would only remember that you would come in contact with me and whether you liked my presentation or not, and whether you felt satisfied after having listened to me. The brain typically zips up information like zip files and tucks them away. The easiest way to access those particular zip files is by emotional connect. So, the stronger the emotional bond, the deeper the connect, and therefore the higher the chance that somebody will remember you and for longer. So, like we were mentioning, strong brands excel in multiple areas because they do not leave anything to chance. Why do they do so? Because they want enough entry barriers into their positioning space so that no other brands, competitive players or various other audience also can take a dig at what they are doing. There are at times naysayer audiences also which tend to retract any sort of support from a brand. So, in order to defend yourself, your positioning, you need to set up capabilities in a variety of areas. Now, let's take certain examples here. In the case of Apple, their core is fixed at design. The look, the feel, the kind of enmeshed technology with the hardware and software playing together at a very, very beautiful level, and form factor, the look, the color, and whatever else, the longevity of the phone, all of these things. Other than that, they also have the ease of use, the apps, the app store itself, the kind of smoothness with which their devices operate. Then they also have something which is their attitude. It's an irreverent attitude. They are not necessarily very rude, but they know that they have a quiet confidence. And this is also reflected in the famous Apple versus PC ads, which you would have seen. There, the Apple persona is very cool and very relaxed, whereas the PC persona is very, very hardworking, maybe at times doing more than is required, and is always trying to prove a point, whilst the Apple persona coolly manages the situation and makes it fun, comic, and enjoyable as well. So that is the kind of attitude, the mental space, the kind of emotional depiction of what the brand really stands for, and the kind of people who would probably associate with that kind of brand. On a similar vein, Nike talks about performance out and out. It talks about innovation. It talks about the winning spirit. It talks about not just winning at championships, but getting up, doing it on an everyday basis like an athlete. It's the mindset of the athlete which is celebrated, not really the ticker tape finish at most often than not cases. Similarly, in the case of Southwest Airlines, you've seen value, reliability, and a very, very happy, fun personality which likes to get people comfortable and enjoying spirit is what creates those points of differentiation for the brand. All of these and various other brands have used these tenets to create a certain likability, a persona which people identified with. Yes, there are a various other number of things that can be built in, and from the positioning they take it up to a level where a brand's identity is crafted, and even a small aspect of it, if you notice it, you'll be able to connect that this is that one particular brand and none other. Even if, for example, if you take the Coca-Cola bottle, the glass bottle, and you smash it, even a fragment of that Coca-Cola bottle, once picked up, will give you the indication that before getting broken, it was a Coca-Cola bottle, which we refer to as brand smashability. That is how well designed it is. That is how design is entrenched in every single foreseeable aspect of the product's presentation and the brand's representation. So with that in mind, let's look at a particular case study. There were method products which were forming a lot of home cleaning solutions. They were clearly in the space of unique, eco-friendly household cleaning products, and that is how their brand stood. So the differentiators they brought in were innovative design, where you got in the likes of somebody like Kareem Rashid. Then they spoke of sustainability, because at the end of the day, for people who have evolved to that level, and they were not priced very low, they were priced at a certain premium. So it was also aimed at certain target audiences with that kind of lifestyle and purchasing power. Sustainability is big because in these circles, people not only want their houses clean, they also want it done with organic stuff. They also want to do something good for the nature and society at large, and sustainability for the future of their children, the other generations that we are coming up with. So, which is why this was derived as a core value for the brand as well. Going further, they did smart retail partnerships. For example, they got a very premium positioning in Target, and that is how they managed to keep all of their products up front and center, so that people of that particular audience picked them up whenever they chanced upon them. Also, keeping the digital and social media aspect in mind, the social media engagement really helped in creating that particular conversion cycle, and they helped nurture the audiences into adoption for the brand. So there are various criteria which you can bring into play to create effective points of difference. Now, first and foremost, desirability. Consumers must really desire your brand. They must really desire what you have on offer. So it has to be relevant to them personally, and it has to be backed by compelling proof. I just do not go and state something upfront. I have proof which showcases what I'm saying to be true, and that creates a reason to believe. In advertising parlance, you'll find these three letters very strongly used across agency formats: reason to believe. These are typically very left-brained, analytical, proof-based, empirical items which people can then completely own. The second part is being deliverable by the company. So they must be feasible, they must be profitable for the organization, and aligned with the brand perception. They cannot be outside of how the brand is perceived. And finally, differentiating from competitors so as to establish that how it is distinctive and superior given what the category constraints are. So, category constraints define the differentiation. These things, when it comes to marketing communication, you will observe that they are very strong points which marketers keep in mind and are always continuously fine-tuning so that they stay ahead of the curve when it comes to competition. On the other side, when you want to be seen as blended in with the category because there is social proof in that, you also have to conform to points of parity. Why so? Because if you go too wayward outside whatever is expressed, then your audience also gets limited. Very few people will be coming and willing to take you up as a category player. So there are certain shared attributes or benefits that establish credibility within the category. So these are typically the category hygiene. These are the must-haves without which you are not even contending within that same category. So category points of parity could be essential to be considered in the category. Correlational points of parity, for example, certain trade-offs, for example, affordability versus quality. At times you may drop the quality a tad bit to be affordable because your target audience will spend only so much on a particular kind of product. Then there are competitive points of parity so that you actually relegate points of difference which have been created by your competition into something which is parity. So you are exactly matching up to what they have offered, but then you have your own differentiators. So that is how you negate the impact of any differentiator which your competitor has created. Most often than not, and very sadly so, this tends to end up being the price. And this is really the last thing which should be the point of parity, that we are at the same price as competition. No. Price is when any other value derived by the brand is completely obliterated and you end up becoming a commodity. And this is the death knell for profitability. Then this particular product will be relegated to something which is completely thrown about by market forces, demand and supply. You will not be able to exert any kind of control over this particular product. For example, let's look at Miller Lite, the beer. Now here they have balanced their parity and differentiation points. So in terms of taste, what they have said is they have taste which comes out to be great, which is parity at full strength beers. However, this is a light beer. So it's a light lager as well. But the fullness of taste, which is something which beer drinkers throng for, is something which it also offers. Then it is less filling. Typically, if you look into the product concoction of beer, you will find a lot of glycerides. If you take a glass of beer and you put a card on top and then turn it upside down over another glass of water, you will see the glycerides leak into the water which is kept below. These glycerides are like soda in food. It bloats you. That is typically what makes you feel more full when you drink beer. And with less filling of glycerides, they have that point of difference. So it also gives you lower calories. It also helps you enjoy more of the drink while not feeling guilty about feeling full. This is something they leverage using athlete as endorsements for credibility, because athletes watch their calorie count very, very strongly. And calorie counts have a direct impact on the amount of calories the athlete has to burn in training, therefore. Although a good beer is something which anybody would enjoy, especially on a hot day. So, how does an athlete get that particular wish fulfilled of enjoying a beer? That is where Miller Lite positions itself as the correct option, which is less filling and so therefore something which anybody can enjoy guilt-free. And they have actually discovered a way to conduct the habit building around it by calling it Miller time. You want to enjoy. Enjoyment is Miller time. And the guilt of being too full after is something they have negated, and it gives you highlight the sociability aspect of it. People can now consume beer without having the guilt of feeling too full. The whole positioning is towards the emotional outcome of sociability. But behind that, there is the analytical as well as the emotional aspects of being able to consume beer at a whim. And that is typically how it is entirely structured. How do you achieve such competitive balance, therefore, you might ask? So, brands must achieve a good enough parity to compete, because they may not be exactly 100% at par with their competition, but they must be at a certain threshold where consumers are willing to look away from whatever is missing and look at more of the differentiating aspects, so that there you see how this particular brand scores over its competition. So, light beer must taste similar to regular beer is one of the prerequisites for Miller Lite's success. Similarly, in terms of finance, Visa versus American Express, when you look at the card companies, you may see how they compete on convenience and prestige. Now, if you're carrying an American Express Black, then the kind of access you have to lounges and travel and the kind of hotels and facilities is something which counts for that particular prestige. And that prestige is something which American Express tries to capture on, while Visa speaks more on the lines of convenience. The positioning is separate. The audiences are also slightly demarcated in that way. Each holds its own of positioning space. Now, how do you define your competitive frames of reference? You define your competitive frames of reference by seeing that brands often compete in multiple categories, and each category therefore requires its own unique points of parity and points of difference matrix. Now, example, Starbucks competes with QSR restaurants like McD's and Dunkin' Donuts, where they serve certain items which are pretty much what you will get at McDonald's, but only better because it's Starbucks. They also compete at the home and office consumption level, because lots of players like Nescafe, Green Mountain Cafe, K-Cups, Costa, various others, they participate in that particular competitive space. They also fight local cafes. So, Starbucks as a brand plays in that particular space and they balance themselves out. They come across as a tad premium compared to the other local level players or even established brands, and they're definitely very different from the QSR experience. So, they create the points of parity as to the kind of meals or the filling experience in terms of the portion size one might experience, but the point of difference is really the taste, the ability to create your own coffee and have it self-owned and so on and so forth. So those are aspects which Starbucks scores over the competition, and that is how they hold their differentiation in that particular congested and cluttered market. So when you have multiple frames of reference, it's like riding multiple boats or multiple horses at the same point in time. So brands must be wary, yet if they do it right, it's very rewarding as well. So straddling multiple frames of reference, brands can combine POPs and PODs across categories. Now, for example, Subway, again, what it did was across QSR, it got against McDonald's by giving parity at taste and the differentiation at health. So they were able to bridge both sides, and versus the health food restaurants, what they did was the parity was health whilst they gave better taste. So they were able to hold their own positioning against two differing kinds of competitors and keep their own hold in this competitive space. Now, straddling expands market reach, but definitely it needs to be credible. It has to have testimonials. It has to have consumers vouching for it. So these things are important for it to hold. Otherwise, there is chances that you will not be able to fulfill whatever you're promising. Now, again, another case study when it comes to BMW, which is straddling luxury versus performance, because US-wise luxury cars lacked performance and performance cars lacked luxury. So it was a dual fight at both ends. Now, what BMW strategy was versus performance cars, they talked about performance as parity, but inside it was luxurious. Whereas with luxury cars, inside the luxury was the parity, but the performance was again something at that particular segment level, it was way above what the other car was performing. And it was positioned as the experience which the driver felt. Typically, luxury cars were cars which were driven by chauffeurs, but BMW used this positioning of the experience of the person at the wheel. So hence, the ultimate driving machine. And it also played up to the sense of control, the sense of power which the driver gets, and the thrill and the associated pleasure of driving with people who are well off but still want to drive and experience that thrill. So hence, luxury performance segment was created behind BMW's entry and their positioning of the ultimate driving machine. So that positioning is something which kept them very, very well stocked in that particular genre. Now, there are certain risks also when you straddle. You balance conflicting consumer needs because you will always have outliers in this particular space, and therefore there may be chances of lack of credibility. So, for example, earlier on you had palm tops which, like Palm Pilot, they did not fly because there was lack of sustainability, failures were very common and all that. So those didn't fly. So therefore you have to ensure your positioning resonates with the target consumers. They must believe that what you are giving is actually true. If they are sold on that, they will keep you and they will pass you on to others as recommendations as well. So that is critical for the success of any brand. There is an 80-20 Pareto rule when it comes to brand positioning. You focus your positioning on 80% of products to avoid dilution in the market. So the majority of positioning is aimed at 80% of your portfolio, and the remaining 20% should align with the brand strategy. So you talk about the identity, you talk about the attitude and various other things. So brand, for example, which is trying to include all products in positioning, it will risk losing the kind of clarity that it has. Brands may have a lot many products under them. You will have certain products which are spearhead products. Those products will be at the tip of your vanguard. They will be the ones you will be pushing all your communication through and on top of, whilst the others get a rub-off effect. So that is typically how you manage your entire brand portfolio, and you create a planogram. You create brands which will give you a proper positioning in that sense. So if you've got the BCG matrix, you've got stars, you've got cash cows, you've got question marks, and you've got dogs. So dogs are the ones you want to avoid. Stars are the ones you'll spend most on. Cash cows tend to glean from whatever you're doing for your stars because they are associated by brand. These are the risky propositions, but high risk, high gain. So you have to keep checking and improving these so that they move to the star segment. So you can look at the BCG matrix here. When you're plotting your products and positioning, you can actually see how your products are going to perform in the market, and you can see which ones you want to keep, which ones you want to lose from your entire larger product portfolio. And when you do that, tools like perceptual maps come in handy. Perceptual maps give you visual tools for brand positioning, and they help identify market gaps and what opportunities that may arise from it. So you've got the SWOT analysis, you've got the BCG matrix, the G matrix. You've got various tools which help you do perceptual mapping. You can also do correlation and spot where your brand is placed vis-a-vis competition in the market. When you overlay consumer preferences, which is what I was speaking of, with brand perceptions, you reveal unmet needs, and you reveal, when you're plotting the brands, you will find clusters in various parts of the conversation, but you will also spot certain areas which are open. If you want to position something there, you have the opportunity to create a new set of items which you can position differently, and that differentiation will earn you some amount of clout with the consumers as well. So that gives you the ability to define your competitive advantage. It is the ability to satisfy customer needs better than whatever in terms of competitive alternatives are available, and you can use these for brand differentiation and avoid what we spoke of earlier on, that your brand, when you're fighting price wars, you turn your brand into a commodity. That is what you can avoid here. So companies must innovate continuously so that they sustain that particular edge, and they can always claim that particular stake. So sustainable competitive advantage, which is something which comes from innovation, is something which is very strong as a marketing concept. Competitive advantage is performing in ways competitors cannot or will not be able to match you, and few advantages are truly sustainable, where they can be the leverage you can have over competition. For example, Roche Holdings biologic drug Rituxan enjoys a 3-year edge before generics arrive. Why? Because they've got patents. So pharmacology giants typically use patents as that warding off factor before the generics are allowed onto the market. They are allowed to gain the benefits from having created something which is a patented drug. Similarly, Microsoft leveraged Windows OS to build its Microsoft Office dominance because they packaged the two together. So if you had to use Microsoft Office, you needed Windows as an OS, and that is why both things sold hand in glove. And differentiation through performance benefits is also something you can look at. So where you create brands that differentiate by offering benefits that are desirable, which are valued by consumers. When Apple created its first iPhone, which Steve Jobs launched, they took away the QWERTY keypad and they gave it touch capabilities which nobody had experienced before in a phone, because of which that touch became so desirable that people never moved away from that kind of touch experience ever. Then the company should be able to reliably provide it, so hence the deliverability of it also became very powerful as an offering. And it also made it distinctive. It became hard for competitors to replicate. So in terms of the iPhone's offerings throughout its entire history, it has always stayed a mile ahead of competition. The fun part is the iPhone never projects what kind of capability its camera has, or what particular processor speed it is using, or which particular RAM is being featured. No, what they tell you is this is what you can achieve with an iPhone. They show you products, the shots that are created. They show you privacy which you can experience. They always talk about the experiential angle. They never talk features. And that has been the way they've also positioned their marketing, their communications, which is very, very starkly different from competition. It always sells hope to the end consumer rather than selling them features, which is a harder sell. Swatch, again a fashion brand, has exceptionally fashionable and colorful watches which it always positions. And in terms of discounted reliable car insurance, Geeko as a brand has continuously been able to hold its own compared to others because it is something which offers that particular same car insurance always at a better, more affordable rate than competition with better features. So that is the beauty of what Geeko has been able to manage. It also takes away middlemen from its selling module, always has been a direct to consumer model, and hence it reduced the costs and has increased its market share. Nowadays you get a lot many other players who are doing this exactly the same way, but they also created memorable ad campaigns enforcing the brand's identity. They got the gecko lizard, which showcased their credibility because it's always consistent, and it was also executed through a lot of campaigns which reinforce the brand's recall. So they had a happier than campaign where they talked about how their consumers were happier than people who had taken similar features in terms of insurance from other competitive brands. Similarly, they had a talking pig which spoke of specific products, and they also had a very simplified "Did you know" campaign which reinforced key brand messages as well. So the outcome was competitor ads got drowned out by Geeko's dominant presence in the market. So this and various other kinds of discovered leverage is what helps marketers change the marketplace in favor of their own differentiation capabilities. Now, how do you adapt to consumer trends? You can open new differentiation opportunities. There are lots of examples. PepsiCo repositioned Sierra Mist as an all-natural drink to tap into health trends, and they fought whatever was coming their way from other primarily health-first brands. Marlboro built a strong brand image beyond product performance, which that macho cowboy, which always got associated with the Marlboro's pack of cigarettes, that appeal always struck out in front of any competition. Hyatt Regency's atrium lobbies created a unique physical brand experience, which you can experience when you walk into any Hyatt anywhere. So it's the similar experience across the world over, and that is typically how Hyatt or the Shangri-La has got this very nice facing of rooms, and you've got balustrades and you've got various levels which you can observe, and glass lifts going up and down. So they try and they curate a kind of experience which they always share. So when you walk into a Hyatt or when you walk into a Shangri-La, you know that you walked into that particular brand of hotel and none other. Taj has been able to do it in a certain way. The kind of perfumes they use, the kind of attire that their staff wear, the kind of greeting that they share with you, all of these things, they are part of the entire brand story. They build in tenets of that kind of experience which you will experience only at that brand and none other. So these are very important parts. When you match consumer needs with competitive strengths also, you identify differentiation opportunities by aligning with what consumers desire, what they truly value, and marry it with company capabilities which you can uniquely deliver and nobody else can copy you there. Lambs, for example, position premium pet food through veterinarians and pet stores instead of supermarkets because they wanted to come across as the right choice for pet parents, and that is something which happened because these conscious pet parents went through the process of pet stores and veterinarians where they got products which they really wanted to buy because they were that invested in their pet parenting exercise. So how do you go about creating sustainable competitive advantage? There are three key strategies which you must look into so that you are able to address these at your particular convenience. The first and foremost is differentiate, differentiate, differentiate. And what you pick up on differentiation, you pick up an existing attribute. Go on that particular journey to see there has to be a meld of what you have and what consumers want. And you have to marry these two. This is a point, and more importantly, what no one else does. That gives you your, this is what your differentiation looks like. And it has to be something which you can own, obviously, what you have but nobody else can. So therefore, that gives you the differentiation point, and definitely it has to be something which is positive for the consumer. So they want it, and that is how you're able to differentiate and introduce new attributes which showcase innovation. And that is something which earns the respect from the consumer, because the consumer believes that you are thinking more and more for them, for their benefit, for their betterment. And you do all your communication to build a strong brand throughout the entire process, so that whatever you are doing is obviously something you take feedback from the consumer end of the mechanism for, so that you are in sync with what their expectations are, with what their wants and desires could be, and how you are standing apart from competition in your ability to provide it to them. So these are aspects that must be thought through by a particular brand. So when you differentiate on an existing attribute, typically the kind of leverage you create to create distinctiveness, for example, Gillette talks about the quality of shave. So each time they talk about a kind of rotor head on the Gillette razor head, or they talk about the lubricants, or they talk about the contact with skin, Gillette talks about the end result, the quality of shave that it is providing you with. Dollar Shave Club, which is a much more cost efficient variant, has the price advantage over Gillette. So they talk about giving all of that. They don't give too many frills, but they always say we deliver a great shave within that particular price point. Zappos talks about excellent customer service. BMW talks about the driver's driving experience. Volvo speaks of safety. Rolls-Royce obviously is plum luxury. So this is how each particular brand holds its space of positioning. And the challenge is that over time, competitors replicate and reduce the differentiation, the points of parity pit coming into play. So you have to constantly evolve. The innovation here is to keep that distance from yourself and the competitor growing large and large and large over time, and yet being relevant to the end consumer. That is critically important. And when you introduce a new attribute, how do you differentiate? Tom says, buy one, give one, social responsibility. So therefore they say, I am buying one, and the one that is given towards others. So it feeds somebody or clothes somebody. So it gives to society, and you become part of that owned charity. The Dollar Shave Club says subscription-based delivery. So you can subscribe to it, and at a certain point in time, you'll get the razors and blades and whatever delivered at your place. Uber talks about cash-free payments. So it is all digital, online, linked to the bank, linked to Paytm, and linked to QR codes and UPI and what have you. Nest talks about machine learning in thermostats. Thermostats which are able to predict what to do with that particular heating and temperature basis the programming that you're doing for it. Method products talk about stylish packaging in a commodity market and give you sustainable products also while you are cleaning your home, etc. Here the challenge is that competitors quickly copy the new attributes. So you have to constantly be at the chopping block inventing newer and newer attributes as well. So the final point where you can create disposition is in the mind of the consumer, and therefore the need for building a strong brand. Here you create the branding as the key differentiator. It is ownable. Nobody else can walk into your space and say that, hey, I am also this, because somebody else has already done it. And even in commoditized market, it works well. For example, Harley Davidson bikes, but you're talking about lifestyle and personal identity, and not just the motorcycles. It's about the lifestyle. So that is where no other brand can really walk into that space and say, because they'll be seen as a me too. And that is the last thing that any brand will want. Coca-Cola, it says global brand power, and it does not really harp only on the taste of it, which is what Pepsi does. Pepsi says in a blind taste test, we'll outshine Coca-Cola. Grey Goose, it is a premium vodka, and it is an undifferentiated vodka market, because every other vodka tastes like every other vodka. But Grey Goose says that we are a premium vodka. And the brand power enhances perceptions of quality, reliability, and durability. Over time, it stands the test of time. So all of these factors come into play, and this helps keep the top of mind awareness as a competitive advantage for you, because the first brand that is recalled in that particular category is automatically the default choice, and that is precisely where you must push your marketing towards. So Budweiser is the first beer brand that comes to mind. Gecko comes in for memorable insurance ads. McDonald's talks about the QSR fast food. Tylenol, Advil or Adlev are top choices in pain relief. The key insight here is that brand that comes first in the consumer's mind has that particular lasting advantage. So that is the holy grail for all marketers, and that is the competitive advantage which we are always as marketers working towards, about delivering something that is unique and of meaningful value. Sustainable because it is difficult, but companies must continuously innovate. And three core strategies that you have to enhance whatever is already existing, introduce something new, and play with the brand. Keep it strong so that people remember you. So that is what we are driving towards, the top of mind awareness angle. With all of these things in mind, you have to keep in mind sustainable competitive advantage is the holy grail. Keep moving towards it. Enhance your existing attributes, introduce new ones, build a strong brand. And how do you do that? Jump back into the frames of reference, find out which points of parity you can drive, and say competition is the same as us, but we also have points of difference where we are better than them. And that you integrate into your performance, the emotional appeal, and the kind of branding that you do, and ensure you're always getting the top of mind awareness. So with that, we come to an end of today's conversation. Going further, we will be exploring the referencing, parity and differentiation in much more detail in the upcoming conversation. Until that time, please have fun with marketing.
Understanding oneself, understanding others, understanding society at large, understanding the nature, these are all driven by basic human curiosity. We would all love to understand why things happen, what happens, what is the final outcome, why certain things fail. These are all exercises that we perform in various domains of knowledge. Therefore, knowledge in various domains, you would realize they are actually social artifacts. They have to be rooted into historical perspective, they have to be culturally salient, and there would be socio-political reasons behind this. Whether you talk with respect to engineering sciences, whether you talk with respect to physical sciences, biological sciences, social sciences, that's the reason why humanities and social sciences should be understood by all of us. The knowledge that is segregated, that is divided with respect to areas, specializations, all of them needs to be understood in its context. And what provides the context? It is the social reality. How do you correlate knowledge in a given domain with the cultural reality, with the social reality, with the socio-political compulsions? Okay, how do you understand the law of nature, okay, in its totality? And for doing that, you require the understanding of humanities and social sciences. Say for instance, if you are trying to understand the effect of a particular bacteria, a virus, any microbe, how it affects behavior, how it affects the organism, human being, you start looking at it from a pure biological point of view. If you are trying to look at a particular type of a wavelength, say for example, you are emphasizing on the understanding of the effect of radiation on human life, you are looking at things from a physical point of view. You are looking at the corresponding changes inside the body, you are looking at the physiological side of the understanding of the information. You are trying to understand why, despite knowing the risk that is inbuilt in the process, why still human beings engage into it? You are looking at it from a pure behavioral point of view. Why society at large admire things which has full of risk? You are trying to understand things from a pure sociological point of view. Why people use particular set of words to explain those experiences? You are trying to understand things from the linguistic point of view. So, there are a whole lot of things, and then finally you try to combine all of them to say that what are the guiding principles in life. Then you say you are looking at life, you are looking at humanity from a pure philosophical point of view. And this is what social sciences courses provide you. They provide the context to you in which you would be finally positioning the understanding of the knowledge in any given domain. It could be engineering, it could be sciences, it could be medical sciences, it could be social sciences stuff, it could be humanities stuff. So, contextualizing the knowledge is what humanities social science courses help you obtain.